Julian stopped the car in front of the rusted iron gate, feeling a weight on his chest that he quickly tried to ignore. The worn-down walls of the nursing home seemed to stifle the air around him. He had made his decision, a choice he believed was inevitable. There was no room for regret, not when he had big plans for his life. He had grown up hearing his mother repeat that he should seize opportunities and go far. Now, at 28, all he wanted was to free himself from anything that tied him to the past. In the back seat, his mother, Mrs. Ellen, remained silent, gazing at the nursing home through the window. Her tired eyes hid the deep sadness she felt. She couldn't understand how the son, to whom she had devoted so much love and sacrifice, could leave her there. She had accepted that, in her old age, it would be difficult for him to care for her. But being taken to an unknown and gloomy place without any consideration broke her heart. "Mom, this is the best thing for you," Julian said as he opened the car door. "Here, you'll get all the care you need." She didn't respond, merely stepped out of the car slowly. Her trembling hands gripped a cane. Each step was a struggle against the pain and wounded pride. Julian walked beside her, hurriedly, avoiding looking directly into her eyes. When they reached the reception, he signed the papers efficiently, as if it were a simple transaction. "I'll come back soon to visit you, Mom," he promised. But they both knew it was a lie. Mrs. Ellen, with tears held back, only nodded. When the metal door of the nursing home closed behind her, Julian returned to his car, feeling a strange sense of relief. He had rid himself of a burden. Finally, he could live his life as he wished without any ties. The days after his mother's departure were filled with a sense of freedom that Julian hadn't experienced in a long time. Without the responsibility of caring for her, he fully dedicated himself to his career. The hours at the office were long, but rewarding. Each closed deal, each promotion, made him feel that his decisions were being validated. After all, this is what his mother had always wanted for him: success and independence. He began traveling more, enjoying the financial rewards of his hard work. Exotic beaches, exclusive parties, expensive dinners in restaurants he'd never dreamed of visiting. Life was good, and Julian convinced himself he had made the right choice by leaving his mother in the nursing home. Every now and then, a memory of her would surface, a glimpse of her aging face or the sound of her loving voice. But he quickly pushed those thoughts aside, distracting himself with new commitments and pleasures. The past no longer bothered him, and he felt no need to visit the nursing home. Life went on, and he was determined to enjoy it to the fullest. However, as the years went by, something began to shift. Quiet moments in his busy routine made him reflect. He had achieved everything he ever wanted: success, money, respect. But for some reason, an emptiness lingered. At night, alone in his luxurious apartment, Julian felt the loneliness like a shadow he couldn't shake. Still, he ignored it. The freedom he had sought was his. There was no room for remorse. Everything was going according to plan. And though memories of his mother occasionally crept in, he remained firm in his decision. After all, he had the life he always dreamed of. The phone rang on a chilly autumn morning. Julian, still groggy, answered without much enthusiasm. On the other end of the line, a formal voice introduced himself as the attorney handling his mother's affairs. He got straight to the point. Mrs. Ellen had passed away a little over a week ago, and Julian was the sole heir to her estate. For a moment, Julian was silent. The news didn't surprise him. After all, his mother was elderly and her health had been declining. However, hearing about the death of a family member, even one so distant, caused a slight discomfort. He allowed himself a brief moment of reflection before refocusing on what truly mattered: the inheritance. "How do we proceed with her assets?" he asked bluntly. The attorney on the other end of the line gave clear instructions. There would be a formal meeting at the nursing home where his mother had spent her final years. They would discuss all the details of the inheritance, and he would need to be there in person. The mention of the nursing home made Julian feel a slight unease. It was a place he hadn't visited since the day he left his mother there. However, he couldn't shake the feeling that his mother's life's work was finally going to bring him a reward. Without wasting time, Julian prepared for the meeting. He dressed in his finest suit, heading toward what he believed would be a pivotal moment. After all, a substantial inheritance could further cement his life of luxury and status. The guilt that occasionally tormented him was once again suppressed by his personal interests. The drive to the nursing home was strange. As he drove, flashes of his mother's memory surfaced, and he forced himself to push them away. When he finally arrived at the nursing home, the sight of the iron gate and the worn-out walls seemed both familiar and distant at the same time. Julian parked the car and sat still for a few seconds, observing the nursing home from a distance. The facade looked even more aged than he remembered, as if time had stopped there but had also corroded every detail. The air was heavy, and the sense of melancholy was almost tangible. He felt out of place, but he knew he couldn't delay any longer. As he entered the lobby, he was greeted by a nurse who seemed to know who he was. Her expression wasn't welcoming. In fact, there was a certain coldness in her eyes. The son who never returned, Julian thought, imagining what she must be thinking. "The lawyer is already waiting for you," the nurse said in a monotone voice. He followed her down the narrow, silent hallways, feeling as though he was being watched. Memories flooded his mind, and he forced himself to ignore them. But it was hard not to think about the last time he was there, when he left his mother behind with an empty promise to visit her. Promise he never kept. Reaching the room where the attorney awaited, Julian wasted no time. The formality of the meeting reassured him, distancing him from the emotions that were trying to surface. The attorney, a middle-aged man with precise gestures, explained that in addition to the legal proceedings, there was a letter left by his mother. The mention of the letter made Julian's heart race. He hadn't expected that. Slowly, he sat down, his eyes fixed on the envelope on the table. The attorney handed it to him calmly, as if expecting some kind of reaction. Reluctantly, Julian took the envelope. His name was written in his mother's delicate handwriting. The mere sight of the letters brought back a flood of emotions he wasn't prepared to deal with. "Please, go ahead and read it," the attorney suggested. Julian hesitated but knew he couldn't put it off forever. Slowly, he began to open the envelope, sensing that something important was about to be revealed, something he might not be ready to face. Julian's hands trembled as he opened the envelope, though he tried to mask any sign of nervousness. Inside, he found a single sheet of paper, carefully folded. The attorney remained silent, watching from a distance, as Julian unfolded the paper and began to read. "My dear son, if you are reading this letter, it means I am no longer here. I always knew this day would come, and even during the hardest moments, my heart never stopped loving you. I understand that life took you far from me, and although it hurt to be left at the nursing home, I tried to comprehend that you were seeking what you believed to be best for your life. I never blamed you, Julian. In every prayer, I wished only for your happiness." The words pierced Julian's heart, each sentence loaded with a tenderness he had long forgotten. His mother's gentle handwriting seemed to echo her voice, bringing back memories of his childhood, when he would run through the house's hallways and she would call after him with affection. "I do not write this to make you feel guilty. On the contrary, I want you to know that I forgive you for everything. You might think you abandoned me, but I never felt truly alone. Every memory of you was a constant companion. Still, there is something important I need to tell you, something that will change your perspective on what inheritance truly means." Julian paused for a moment, absorbing her words. His mother's forgiveness seemed genuine, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't suppress the lump in his throat that was beginning to form. He knew, deep down, that despite all his success, he had failed as a son. But he continued reading. "I know you probably expected to inherit something of material value, perhaps some money or a possession that could help you continue your journey. But over the years, I realized that the greatest inheritance I could leave behind is not something money can buy. The true inheritance, Julian, is love, forgiveness, and the lesson that the people we love are the most precious treasures we can ever have." Julian finished reading the letter, feeling a heavy weight settle in his chest. His mother's final words hit him like a wave of emotions that he couldn't control. He had expected a fortune, something that would further enhance his financial success, but what his mother had left him was a life lesson. Something that, until that moment, he had not understood: the true value of the people in our lives. The attorney, who had remained silent as Julian read, finally stepped forward and placed a small wooden box on the table. It was simple, worn by time. "Your mother left this for you," the attorney said solemnly. Julian opened the box slowly, expecting to find something of value inside. But what he found was an old photograph. It was an image of him as a child in his mother's arms. Both were smiling, happy, with the sun shining on their faces. The photo was simple, but filled with meaning. "In addition to the photo, your mother made a significant donation to a charity in your name," the attorney continued, revealing the part Julian had feared. "She decided that the best use of what she had would be to help others, leaving a legacy of love and care." The shock coursed through Julian like lightning. The inheritance he had been expecting didn't exist. All the wealth, any material value she might have accumulated, now belonged to people he didn't even know. He wouldn't receive a single cent. The revelation left him speechless. The photo in his hands felt as heavy as lead. The memories of his childhood, his mother's unconditional love, all of it came flooding back as he struggled to grasp what he had just heard. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the overwhelming feeling of emptiness. He had expected wealth, but what he received was a painful reminder that he had neglected the most important thing. Julian left the room in silence, the box in his hands, his mind swirling, and his heart aching. His mother's words echoed in his mind: "The people we love are the most precious treasures we can ever have." Julian walked out of the nursing home like a ghost, slowly making his way to his car, unaware of the time passing. The wooden box rested on the passenger seat beside him, while he stared at the steering wheel, lost in thought. His mother's final words echoed in his mind. He couldn't believe it had all ended this way. No inheritance, no fortune, no comfortable future as he had expected. Throughout his life, Julian had convinced himself that material success was what truly mattered. He had worked tirelessly, distanced himself from anything that could hold him back, and unfortunately, that included his mother. But now, as he held the photo, he realized how hollow it all was. The wealth he had pursued for so long didn't bring the comfort he thought it would. The pain of his mother's absence mixed with deep regret. He remembered all the times he could have visited her, all the occasions he could have called but chose not to. Time had passed, and now it was too late. His mother's voice echoed in his mind, repeating words of forgiveness, but Julian couldn't forgive himself. Sitting there in the silence of his car, he began to reflect on his choices, on the path he had taken. His mother had left him something far more valuable than any amount of money: a lesson. She wanted him to understand that true wealth isn't found in what we accumulate, but in the people we have by our side. Julian realized that, despite all his material success, he was lonelier than ever, and now there was no way to turn back the clock. The tears he had tried to hold back finally broke free, rolling down his cheeks uncontrollably. He knew it was too late to make up for lost time, but something inside him screamed for redemption. After hours of reflection, Julian made a decision. He couldn't undo what had been done in the past, but there was still something he could do to honor his mother's memory. He stood up with a new purpose in mind. He knew the road to redemption would be long and difficult, but he was willing to try. From that moment on, he was committed to doing something meaningful, something that could turn his regret into something positive. The next day, Julian returned to the nursing home, but this time not to retrieve something for himself. He met with the administration and offered both financial and personal assistance. The nursing home, which had been his mother's home for her final years, would now become his focus. He wanted to ensure that other residents would live a dignified life, with more comfort and care. In addition, he reached out to the charity to which his mother had donated her fortune. He spoke with the organizers and offered to support their work, both financially and with his time. He felt that this was the closest he could get to keeping his mother's legacy alive, by doing good for those who needed it. Julian also visited his mother's grave for the first time since the funeral. He brought flowers and spent hours there, speaking softly as if she could hear him. He apologized, acknowledging all the mistakes he had made, and promised, out loud, that he would do everything possible to become someone she could be proud of. The words of forgiveness she had left him were now his strength to move forward. As he left the cemetery, Julian felt something different within him. For the first time in many years, he didn't feel empty. The material wealth he once valued no longer held the same importance. The love and lesson his mother had left behind would now guide his steps. He knew there was still much to do, and that the road to true redemption would be long. But at least now he was willing to walk that path, knowing that somewhere, his mother was smiling down on him with the same love she had always had.